My goodness, it's 45 years ago, I guess, since we started making The Saint. And what I'm doing now, I couldn't have been doing then, because I would be walking on water. This is reclaimed land that I am on. Behind me is Monaco and the port of Fontvieille, and this here is the port of Cap d'Aille, which is in France. My name is Roger Moore. I used to play Simon Templar.
Since their debut in 1928, the adventures of Simon Templar the Saint have thrilled millions. By the middle of the 1960s, book sales had long passed 20 million. A newspaper comic strip written by the Saint's creator was in the middle of a decade-long syndication run, and a number of black and white films and radio series, which ran throughout the 1940s and 50s, had all helped to make Simon Templar one of the world's first true multimedia heroes.
Well, I can honestly say, Madge, I have never seen anything like it in my life.
Oh, isn't it thrilling? Now you stay right here.
The path to TV heaven for Simon Templar, better known as the Saint, wasn't discovered by this chap. Sadly, neither was it down to this chap. Or this chap. And it definitely wasn't down to this fellow. This fellow tried, unlike this fellow who didn't. And as for this chap, well, we'll save what he did to the Saint's career for another time. It was this fellow, Leslie Charteris, who put the Saint on the road to TV heaven. As a matter of fact, he did a little more than that, for it was he who, in 1928, documented the Saint's first adventure in a novel entitled Meet the Tiger. He was born Leslie Charles Bowyer Yin in Singapore in 1907. It was his third book, Meet the Tiger, that introduced the world to Simon Templar. Who knows where an idea comes from? The Saint was just originally a character who came to life in my head, not so long after I started writing. But he was not the first character I thought of. He was, as a matter of fact, the fifth. I went on and created 2 or 3 other characters, each of them in an individual book. And then I suppose I got lazy, or I got the idea that it was better to continue and build up one character than to spread yourself around among a dozen. So I looked back over the characters I created so far, and I picked the Saint. I liked him the best, and decided to go on with him. Charteris wrote 21 Saint books throughout the 1930s, and by the end of the decade, they were being published around the world, with editions in England, America, South America, Italy, France, East Europe, and many other countries.
I've read some of them, and I love the one that was dedicated to me, The Saint in Action, which hoped I may meet a saint someday.
RKO optioned The Saint in New York, but a planned 1935 movie was deemed too violent by the Hayes office, and it took another 3 years before Charteris's brighter buccaneer would appear on cinema screens. When he did, in the 1938 form of Louis Hayward, it was a great success. And over the next few years, a series of B pictures, with George Sanders taking over the halo, were made with moderate success.
I think Simon Templar first came into my life long before acting did, because I would see George Sanders as George Sanders, yes.
I saw a George Sanders movie, and I thought, what a terrific character. Debonair, answerable to nobody. He seemed rich as Croesus. He had all the money in the world and helped everybody who was in distress. Terrific character.
The earlier films of, The Saint were sort of stiff upper lip, very sort of high-class sort of guys, weren't they, who did this.
He was an amazing man, George Sanders. He actually committed suicide when he was 65, and he had told David Niven 15 years before. He said, when I'm 65, David, I shall kill myself. Very sad.
It was early in 1945 that saw the Saint on American radio. He was played by Edgar Barrier, and the show was written, produced, and occasionally directed by Leslie Charteris. And later that year, Brian Aherne picked up the halo for a 13-week run. Ratings weren't great, and the show wasn't recommissioned. The Saint took a 2-year break from the airways before returning in the form of Vincent Price.
The Adventures of the Saint, starring Vincent Price. The Saint, based on characters created by Leslie Charteris and known to millions from books, magazines, and motion pictures. The Robin Hood of modern crime is now transcribed for radio, starring Hollywood's brilliant and talented actor Vincent Price as the Saint.
Anything wrong, Captain?
Nothing serious, Mr. Templar. Just coming down here for a check. Go on just as soon as we can.
Oh, and where is here?
Headstone, New Mexico. Used to be a big silver mining town, but now it's just another little town, I guess.
Price's run ended in May 1951, and actor Tom Conway took over the lead for a few months before the show was cancelled altogether.
I think the thing about The Saint was, unlike many other of the ITC shows, it wasn't invented for television. The Saint had been around for a while, so it had a legacy. People understood the Saint, understood the character. It had a following. There'd been films. There'd been hundreds of books and short stories from Charteris.
It was, in fact, a friend of Charteris's who would prove to be key to bringing the adventures of the Saint to television. John Paddy Carstairs was a writer, artist and director, and had got to know Charteris through his work in directing the 1939 George Sanders film The Saint in London. Being freelance, one day in the early 1960s he popped into the London offices of Tempion Films to see his friends, film producers Robert S. Baker and Monty Berman.
I had read the Saint stories as a kid and always admired them, and I always thought that here was absolutely wonderful subject for television.
John Paddy Carstairs wandering in one day to Barbara Monty and saying that he knew Leslie Charteris.
I happened to mention, we were looking for a television series and Saint would be great. He said, well, it's very funny you should say that. I had lunch with Leslie Charteris yesterday. He's over here now. I said, well, could you arrange a lunch for Leslie Charteris and myself? He said, sure, no problem. So Monty Berman, myself and Leslie Charteris had lunch together.
With Carstairs' help, Baker and Berman got an agreement in principle for the TV rights.
How I managed it, I don't know, because Leslie is rather a mercurial figure, and I persuaded him to give me a 3-month option, free of charge, on The Saint. I said I thought I could get the show going.
Baker initially took the show to Brian Tesler at Associated Rediffusion, but he balked at the proposed budget of £16,000 per episode. So then, Robert S. Baker went to see TV mogul Lou Garrard.
I was invited to a charity dinner. I found myself at the table with Lou by myself. I went over and moved over to Lou and said, Lou, I've got the rights of The Saint. How about a television series based on The Saint? He says, Saint is a great idea. He says, I've always read the books as a kid. I love to do it. Come and see me Monday morning.
After some discussion, Grade, well aware of the potential international sales of the series, agreed that the initial 26 episodes would be shot on film, and he upped the budget to £30,000 per episode. To help adapt Charteris's stories for the small screen, Baker and Berman hired a Canadian story editor by the name of Harry Junkin, a decision that Charteris would grow to dislike.
When you make an hour show, you've got to split the story into 3 parts. The Saint has the problem, the Saint develops the problem, and then the Saint solves the problem. So you had the entire middle section of Leslie Charteris' stories were missing completely. So we had to invent the middle section. So in order to invent a middle section, you have to alter the first section, and also when you alter the first section and you invent a middle section, you're going to alter the last section. So consequently, any writer that sees any difference, a different interpretation of his original story is going to yell.
He simply said, you have a crisis, you have a climax, and you have a conclusion. And he said, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. He said, if you don't have an Act 2, you don't have an Act 3.
But then, all writers, original writers, they don't like to see their work copied by somebody else and changed and altered. So he was a bit vitriolic.
And because Leslie wrote prose doesn't necessarily always transfer to the screen in the literal sense of the story. And Harry took the liberties that he had to do because he understood the art form beautifully.
We tried to accommodate him as much as possible. He would make suggestions. If we could include the suggestions, we did. If we couldn't include the suggestions, we just didn't. It was simple as that. We had a show to make. Leslie had sold the rights. And we were trying to do the best for the show, not for the worst. I mean, we weren't trying to ruin Leslie's work. We were trying to improve upon that.
He sent some horrific memos to the writers, or to Harry Junkin, who was the script supervisor.
One memo he sent was, I think, very craftily worded.
This script is fit for Junkin.
I showed it to Harry Junkin, who fell about laughing. He kept the memo. He said, "This is the prize one. That's absolutely great."
Harry Junkin was jokey, but they were also, majority of them were so serious because they had a job to do and they had a lot of work to get through.
Harry had his pulse on what the audience would want. At that particular time in the development of television drama, he understood the attention span of an audience.
His gift was that he was an absolute master at editing scripts. And it has to be a gift. It's not something that you can teach or you can learn simply.
And he was very skillful. And if a writer wasn't ready to listen to him, then it was his loss. Because I learned a lot from the man.
Initially, the producers wanted to cast Patrick McGoohan, but he wasn't enamoured by the saint's unsaintly way with the damsels in distress, and both Baker and Berman felt his style wasn't sufficiently tongue-in-cheek, as the character demanded.
Lou suggested I meet Patrick McGoohan, who was making the series called Danger Man over here. We started talking about the saint, and he said, "Well, you know, suppose you give me a script and I don't like it and I throw it out the window, what will you do then?" So I said, I think there's no further purpose in continuing this meeting.
But apparently, amongst other things, McGoohan wouldn't kiss a girl on the screen. It wasn't that he had any gender problems, it's just that I think he had more religious problems about it all.
But he didn't like kissing girls on screen. He's very Catholic.
He has uneasy relationships with women on the screen. You never see him holding a woman or kissing a woman or doing anything with a woman, so he was quite wrong.
Actors not considered for the part include William Hartnell, Kenneth Williams, Jean Barry and Jean Marsh. And who writes this rubbish? Sadly, Ian Ogilvy wasn't available at the time. And so it wasn't long before the producers came knocking at the door of 34-year-old Roger Moore.
When someone said, "You know, Roger Moore's over in Italy making a movie. He's not under contract anymore. Maybe we can approach..." Roger Moore, I said, absolutely perfect. I mean, he was Sir Lancelot, the right sort of age, the right sort of looks, could do action and so forth.
What is it? He said, "Well, you know, it's a television series that Lou Grade is going to do, and Lou wants you." Okay. Let me read the script.
Roger read the script and phoned back immediately and says, "Yes, I'm on. I'll do the same." So that's how we signed Roger Moore.
In retrospect, it's difficult to think of another actor of his period that could have played the Saint. If you look at the other stars of the day, look at Patrick Macnee, perhaps he could have pulled it off. You look at Patrick McGoohan, perhaps he could have pulled it off. But they would have been very different Saints. Roger Moore had authority. He had the size and the bulk to actually play the Saint well, and he was also almost too good looking. He was ruggedly handsome in that stage, and you know, just perfect casting.
It's every woman's ideal man, I suppose. Getting involved in impossible adventures with an extremely attractive man to protect one and get one out of it. So obviously, as the audience is largely female anyway, for that type of television, I mean, you couldn't find anybody better than Roger.
And I thought it was wonderful that he was doing this role, which I think, as everyone says, it was perfect for him. for his talents, for his ability, for his whole personality.
He was the most gorgeous guy I'd ever seen. I had to look up because he's tall, and I thought, this is really movie star time. And what's he doing television?
He really seemed to fit the part. He seemed to be flippant, but you just imagine that when he had a fight, he could handle himself. He was big, you could imagine him being attractive for women, and also he had this edge perhaps that you could imagine that he could be steely when needed to be.
I think he did portrayed the saint well, and I think that it became quite popular for people to watch.
I think there are two sorts of actors. There are actors who can do the sort of thing that Roger did so well, tremendous panache, tremendous charm, and he looked good, and he did everything that was asked of him. But then you take an actor like Ian Kellan, and it's a very different sort of thing entirely. I mean, he's so versatile, Ian, that he can play King Lear, or he can play a character in Coronation Street. He has that. I can't see Roger doing that, but then he probably wouldn't want to in any case. But I mean, he made his own niche in what he did as the saint, and of course, I mean, he's known worldwide because of that.
He did what he had to do very well. He did it with charm. He did it with purpose. He had a light touch, which was fine. But no, he was perfectly, absolutely 100% right.
Roger Moore is an actor who will be much more amenable to seducing his leading ladies. So it's got a sexual element that was missing from Danger Man as well. So it sort of, if you like, it propels that type of ITC action adventure, semi-cop, semi-spy, semi-crook crime show into the next level. It takes the if you like, the building bricks, the scaffolding of Danger Man, but builds on it and makes this show which, when you leave the Saint many years later, you've paved the way for all the shows that come after it.
The character of the Saint has been portrayed in many different versions. I mean, in films going back to the 30s and so on. I think when Roger was asked to do it, he brought it into his own sort of his own right, really. I think a lot of it is Roger's charm, personality, and he made the Saint for himself.
Moore signed on for the new half-hour show, only to get a small surprise from the mighty Lou.
And I was with an agent called Dennis Van Tart at that time. And I said, Dennis, this is an awfully long script for a 30-minute show. He then called somebody in the office in London who said, no, it's half-hour series. So on the basis of a half-hour series, I went ahead. I thought 26 or 39 episodes, it's half a year, and doodly-doo.
We had a meeting at ATV House with Lou Grade, introducing myself, my partner at the time, Monty Berman, and Roger, to announce the new series of one-hour shows called The Saint.
I said, half hours?
I said, no, Roger, 1 hour show.
I said, oh dear, I have a contract that sort of is based on a half-hour series, and this is sort of doubling it. So there was a little change in Lou's favour, of course.
It worked. I mean, if we couldn't have gotten a better person anywhere than Roger to play the Saint for 6 years non-stop, and that's an achievement in itself.
I thought he did a very nice job.
Roger Moore brought many different attributes to the character, not least his eyebrows, and helped define exactly who Simon Templar was for a new audience.
I don't think that when I started doing The Saint that I was conscious of anybody else having done it.
The character of Simon Templar is very clear in Leslie's books. He is a rogue, he is a thief, he only attacks people that deserve to be attacked, as it were.
He was still that rugged, unreconstructed type of character that you would have got in thick-eared 50s movies, but he was also more suave than that and moving towards something more sophisticated.
He was a devil-may-care, elegant Englishman who fought crime and saved ladies in distress.
I think Simon was right for its time in that we needed people who would be aware of the damsel in distress, who wasn't driven by personal motives.
Simon Templar, according to the Flyleaf, the closest way I can think of describing Simon, or Sebastian Tombs, which he used as his cover quite often, never getting far away from ST, he could use the same language. Simon Templar was, as Charteris described him, a modern-day Robin Hood.
Later on in his career, the Saint would point out that I am not a respectable citizen. I shoot people and I open safes. I'm not popular. People send me bombs through the mail, and policemen are always looking for an excuse to arrest me. There isn't any peace or stability where I'm around.
The Saint, of course, we suggested he never actually robbed anyone, but he would do something and claim 10% from the insurance people to return the jewellery that was stolen or something like that. So we found a moral way around the Saint's attitude.
He's a man that, sadly, the character, we don't have them anymore. And I don't think we're going to see them again, because they don't belong anymore to our society.
It's appealing. He appeals to old-fashioned ideas. I mean, I still like it when a man opens a door for me. I know people who will slam a door in the face and say, "How dare you open the door for me?" You know. But no, I like that kind of way of being, and I think that there should be more people with grace and charm and kindness.
Robbing the rich, but not the rich, robbing the evildoers, the sinners, taking back what they'd stolen, and putting things right in his own way.
He's also very engaging, because we too would love to be like that if we could. We always get the girl in the end. Kind of nice.
The Flyleaf for Follow the Saint remarked, "Mr. Charteris's amazing character, popularly known as the Robin Hood of modern crime. No deeds of daring lie beyond the limits of his prowess. No language is too tall in which to record his saucy exploits. It is excellently well done." Meanwhile, the News Chronicle claimed, "The Saint is a dashing daredevil." And the Daily Telegraph remarked, "The Saint is a roaring adventurer who loves a fight." The ever popular Liverpool Post remarked, "The Saint, that exhilarating character."
Now it came to adapting him for television. We had certain no-nos that we couldn't use. For instance, in the books of the Saint carries a knife up his sleeve. Well, knives that I made a decision were definitely out. They weren't going to be ever used in the show, and we never used knives in the show.
Harry was very clear. If he could resolve something without a weapon, but resolve it with his fisticuffs, then that was much better than having a gun, because too many guns were around in the sense of American TV shows, everybody handled it with a gun.
The Saint always had to fight fairly. He couldn't kick anyone in the balls or do anything like that. So he had to fight by the Marquess of Queensberry rules. So there were certain adjustments that we could make.
Of course, the character of Simon Templar wasn't the only thing the producers bought from Charteris.
The figurehead of the Saint, the stick man with the halo, was invented by Leslie Charteris and registered by his company. So, in point of fact, he had all rights. No one could use the stick. They could use the stick man. That's not the problem. But he couldn't use the stick man with the halo. So consequently, when we did the deal with Leslie Charteris, we also bought the rights to use the stickman and the halo as part of the show.
In an attempt to make the show more appealing to the viewers, a rather unusual idea was struck upon. Why not have Mr. Moore address his audience directly?
I'm waiting for an old friend whom I haven't seen in 10 years and who's been married for 9. The question is, what's his wife like, and will she like me? What do you suppose would happen if women used no makeup at all and faced the world as nature intended them? It's a frightening thought, isn't it? You know, Monte Carlo's always the same. A marvelous masquerade of marble, mink, music, and millionaires.
I can remember how powerful that opening sequence was when he looks up at the halo and talks directly to you, breaking the fourth wall. I thought that was an interesting thing. It wasn't a device they got from the books. It was a device that was created solely for television.
But I found it enchanting at the time, and you don't question it. You say, that's the style of the show. And any writer who would question the style of a show did it at his peril. He would probably never work again.
I think the fun that there was in The Saint was that, having settled into it and having this idea of addressing the camera, so you're taking the audience in with you, you're with them, so we could go off in different directions. We could have fun with it, or we could be very serious, but invariably I played it tongue-in-cheek.
Can a man look at camera, and can this little halo pop up? Will it be silly? It was enchanting, because only Roger could do it.
The Saint are fairy stories for adults. This is what they are, really, if you analyse them. You have a hero that is almost impossibly good-looking, impossibly brave, against impossible odds and always winning. So you're in fairyland. So why not take your audience into fairyland with you?
You know that it's just a bit of fun. It's not. Don't take it too seriously, except when the man holds the gun and all that sort of thing. It's fun. That's later in the third reel. But
the Saint would direct the audience. In other words, the Saint was talking to everyone in their living room. It made it very personal between him and his audience. The empathy was there between it.
It was never meant to be terribly serious. In fact, it wasn't meant to be taken seriously at all, because after all, every episode opens with this device of his face, and he looks up and there's the halo.
Honey, this is one of the greatest friends a guy ever had. True blue, honest as the day is long.
I take it you're the world-famous Simon Templar. John, this is Simon Templar.
Between Denise Dumont and the famous Simon Templar.
So, with our hero in place, only one thing was missing: his trusty steed. No, not that steed. His Volvo.
We wanted to have a very distinctive car, so we thought that the Jaguar sports car, the E-Type, was just coming out at that particular moment. It was very, very with-it car.
We started the series, and obviously the Saint had to drive a motor car. You know, he has to have the Saint's car. And so the first thing I did was to start phoning around all the car companies to try and see if they would loan us the car for the series. I'm ringing around Mercedes, and I'm ringing this one and that one. And the Mercedes said, well, we could let you have one for a day, you know. I said, I'm talking about a series that's going to run for a minimum of 12 months, you know, probably starting off with 13 episodes. And I was in despair. So we had a meeting with Roger.
And I said, let's get two cars. You buy one for the company and I'll buy my own personal. And if we should have second unit out, or one unit on the stage and need two cars, you always use mine.
So I rang back to Jaguars, who had turned us down for a car. And I said, look, you know, I said, it actually pains me to do this. I said, but Mr. Moore, who is our star, is going to buy a car and use it in the series. And so I would like to accelerate a delivery of a Mark 10. And this guy said, well, I'm sorry. He said, you know, we can sell all the cars we can make. He said, I can't give you any priority in delivery. And I couldn't believe it, because, I mean, you know, the advertising potential, the free potential for the loan of a car was just astronomical.
He said, but you see, but this is for a television series that's going to be shown around the world. Well, what do we need publicity for? We have $25 million worth of orders we can't possibly fill.
The man on the other end, who was in the publicity department, says, well, quite frankly, we're not particularly, you have to wait for a car. As if the owner of Jaguar, Lord, whatever his name was, wanted a car, he'd have to wait with everybody else. So I'm afraid it will be about 6 months before we can promise you a car.
So with that, I thought, well, I give up, you know, where do you go from there? So I was talking with friends, and a mate of mine in the special branch said, you know, Johnny, so I saw a car driving around the West End the other day, a new one, a sporty-looking car. It's something called a Volvo or something. So I got on to and found out where this showroom was, and I said to Roger, apparently there's a very nice... He said, I'll go and take a look.
Within 2 days, we had them taxed and on the road, the two of them. And they were very good Volvo, because every year they would change, having bought the originals, they would change them.
When we asked them to supply us a car, they said, oh, great, fine, yes, you can have one. What colour would you like? When would you like it?
That was the start of almost putting Volvo on the map in the United Kingdom, maybe more than the UK. And from then onwards, whenever Roger travelled anywhere in the world, when he arrived at the airport, there would be a Volvo car, you know, available for his personal use. And, you know, that's how it started.
Not only did we have a P1800 Volvo, they sent us the bodywork so that we could shoot interiors in the studio without having to use the actual car. Then again, they supplied a second car, which we could use for second unit. So one car we could use for main unit, one car for the second unit, so it worked out fine.
Very ingenious. You've come a long way since your Scotland Yard days, Martin. Hello, Miss Chambers. How's Merrill's portrait coming along?
All right, I think. She's a lovely girl.
Yes, a pity her father's so impossible.
He can afford it.
We'll see.
The series debuted on October the 4th, 1962, with the first 12 episodes keeping viewers in front of their televisions on a Thursday evening, right up until Christmas.
I just can't wait for my next assignment. Me, working for James Bond.
Hmm?
I'm so excited. You're not just teasing me, are you? You really are James Bond.
The second series debuted on September the 19th, 1963, and production had been extended by 13 episodes, meaning that this season would run until March the following year. But not everyone was happy.
We had arrangement with Leslie Charteris that he couldn't veto any of our stories, his stories. These were his original stories, but we had to adapt them for television.
He would make observations on all the script. He would be consulted on his original stories, and then stories that we had to invent when they started running out of books. And he was very proud about, what Simon Templar was and could do.
Leslie Charteris, seeing his stories adapted for TV, let loose in print with his thoughts. That typically synthetic product, emasculated by innumerable taboos and shibboleths, and cramped into a pattern of antiseptic mediocrity, with the sole objective of making it inconceivably inoffensive to any sponsor, and hopefully saleable anywhere, bears no more relation to the Saint that I wrote, as many faithful readers complained to me, than Winnie the Pooh bears to Captain Blood. Now, this is no disparagement of Roger Moore, a very charming fellow indeed, and a personality actor who cannot help portraying the Saint as he would have looked perhaps during the first half of his career. Now, the defects are in the mentalities of the producers and their script department, who sensed with infallible talent that the Saint was different and devoted their best energies to making him conventional. And initially, American TV networks felt the same. Between the first two seasons, Lou Grade flew to America, intent on selling the Saint to one of their TV networks. Vice Chairman of NBC, Mort Werner, on seeing one of the episodes, declared he never seen so much crap in all his life. CBS and ABC also failed to sign up to the Saint, and so Grade was left to peddle the show to the smaller syndicated stations. Meanwhile, the show went from strength to strength in the UK and in many other countries, and when Grade went stateside again in 1966, NBC put it in their schedule as a summer replacement for the Dean Martin show, competing against CBS, who were playing first-run classic Hollywood movies. Much to the surprise of the short-sighted network executives, the Saint beat the movies, and the executives realized they wanted more. Well, quite. But despite the apparent success, Charteris remained distinctly unconvinced. Many of the results, fulfilling my worst forebodings, were lamentable. But many of the so-called adaptations of my own cherished stories were no less lamentable after the weird wizardries of television production had got through with them. Some of those adaptations, in defiance of every contractual safeguard, had been almost unrecognisable anyhow. Oh well, I guess you can't please everyone all the time. In a memo to the show's producer, Robert S. Baker, he let loose his comments on The Old Treasure Story, the final black-and-white episode to be filmed. Your script of The Old Treasure Story is, as I have learnt to expect by this time, a typical travesty of the original, with every original aspect carefully filtered out and replaced with your own favourite time-worn ingredients. Having also learnt that my criticisms had absolutely no effect when opposed to the almighty genius of Junkin, I shall not waste my energies discussing specific absurdities. The totally unnecessary loss of the treasure continues your policy of never letting the saint come out of any adventure with any profit, even legitimately, thus perpetuating your invention that he must be independently wealthy. It is ironic. I've been given to understand that your television series is ending because there are no more saint stories, when this script is one more proof that you've never really needed any of my originals to begin with, being so brilliantly able to create your own. I cannot adequately convey my delight that this is apparently the last of your saint productions, and the last time I shall have to suffer the ordeal of reading the corny abominations which you've lately been perpetrating on my stories. Despite all the distortions and emasculations which shook up a probable majority of hitherto faithful readers of the Saint books, that first TV series was a big hit in Britain, where it was made, and many European countries, and was even fairly successful in the United States, although presented in most areas at such impossible hours that only chronic insomniacs, night watchmen, or veritable fanatic fans would have caught it. Indeed, the American success was remarkable enough for NBC to become interested in putting the show on their full network, in colour, and in what is called prime time, a promotion which had never before been offered to any series previously established in syndication. Following the tremendous success of the black and white episodes, which had sold around the world, Lou Grade declared he wanted more. But this time, in colour.
I think the reason why ITC went colour earlier on was because of international sales, especially with an eye to America. America had colour long before us, or experimented with colour long before us. And so if you had a colour series, you sold it well.
The black and whites have served their purpose. They've established the show very successfully. And it was obvious that we had to follow up with colour.
You see, there was a bit of question about doing things in colour for television because nobody had colour sets. So although colour had been around in the feature film industry for quite a long time, colour for television didn't come in till later. By the time colour hit television, people knew how to do it from the feature film experience.
With American sales becoming increasingly essential to finance shows such as The Saint, colour was soon a necessity. It wouldn't be long before a variety of shows were filming in colour, including The Avengers, Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, The Adventurer, The Prisoner, Man in a Suitcase, and Randall and Hopkirk Deceased.
The move from black and white to colour was really quite a sort of an event, actually.
If you're brought up on black and white television, you're not biased towards it, so it didn't seem like, we were missing something by having them in black and white. They were beautifully shot by film people that knew how to light and how to do that thing well. So they actually stood up. They actually looked very good.
The transmission of colour on television had certain restrictions. For instance, we were told by the networks that you should never have a total white on the set. Oatmeal would represent white, and you should never have black. Charcoal was as dark as you can go because the range of the colour transmission at that time was restricted.
They did have certain things they didn't want particularly to happen with colour. What it affects is the lighting, makeup, the set design for the colours, wardrobe, and the laboratory, which has to develop the film. And developing colour film is quite different from developing. But for the actor, it makes no difference at all.
I know colour was regarded with sort of deep suspicion. We'd all been so brought up with black and white movies, even though obviously one had seen colour, Technicolor stuff as well. But it was just something that was very glamorous and rather wonderful. But then you became worried about a whole sort of different sort of rules. You know, you thought, well, will I photograph so well in colour? Does my hair look so awful? What my eyes? And one's eyes were very important, of course, because those, as you know, are the windows of the soul and you know, transmit whatever emotion you're feeling. So I remember thinking it was quite something to be on colour television.
A lot of professional concern about whether the girl's frock would clash with the wallpaper of the set or whatever. And people put a lot of thought into that.
They wouldn't allow any reds at all. You had your technical advisor from Technicolor on the set all the time and worked on the design of the sets with advising on the set colours and costumes.
And I remember things strobing, you know, checks and stripes and the effect it had on it caused a strobing effect. I didn't understand it, but the crew was so wonderful on those shows.
We got a booklet and papers and so forth from the networks, which was the Bible for photographing colour.
And the costume designers would obviously have been briefed, and then probably they carried out their instructions, and that was that.
Laura Nightingale was the wardrobe mistress, and we had certain rules that we couldn't have black, we couldn't have striped shirts because they would strobe, and certain blue screens, you had to have certain clothes. You couldn't have blues because that would bleed into the, you'd have to have contrasting clothes.
The American people would say they couldn't use the bright colours like red, like white, and also black. So if you had to provide any clothes, you had to keep within the colour scheme.
The process of filming those episodes seemed, I think, quite slow. It seemed to take forever to light because of the various variations in... there was always a huge argument going on about what you could wear and what you couldn't wear. And it didn't matter how lovely the outfit was. If it wasn't right for the camera, you couldn't wear it, and that was that.
But Laura was very good. She used to get... We never had white shirts. They were always white shirts that had been dipped in tea, so they're just a little bit broken white. Never had black. It would be grey or just not very subtle clothing. And Roger's clothes, of course, were excellent. I mean, he's a clothes horse. He looks fantastic in anything.
Apart from that, everything was just the same.
And also, when colour first came along, perhaps the stock wasn't quite as good as it was later on. But there's certainly the entire series hangs together as a whole. I mean, there's no real huge drift in style, just tiny things.
And of course, one of the great things with it is not to take too much notice. Otherwise, you become self-conscious about everything suddenly in colour, and we've got to have great splashes of red or blue or whatever.
With more adventures for the Saint to be written, the producers didn't hesitate to hire Harry Junkin, who'd script edited the first 71 episodes. Also staying on for the colour episodes was writer Terry Nation, who would regularly bring in any one of about 3 stories before slapping a different title on it and having it filmed for the umpteenth time.
I do remember there was an occasion when I think the Baron got short of a script. They ran out of scripts and they needed something rather hurriedly.
Terry was tearing his hair out, trying to figure what story to do, get the script finished in time. So what he did do is got one of his old scripts that he had written for a previous show and rewrote it. In other words, he used a story, but he altered it and coloured it up and so forth.
Peter. Oh, Peter. Oh, Morris.
Have they been on to you again?
Yes.
How much this time?
5,000.
Have you got it?
Peter, I can't go on like this anymore. You've got to help me, please.
But how? I haven't any money.
No, not that. I want you to come with me and help me find out who it is.
Lita, that's impossible. If he thought for one moment you were trying to double-cross him, he'd ruin you. If they thought for 1 minute that you were trying to double-cross them, they'd ruin you.
I just don't care anymore. I don't care anymore.
I do care. I care very much what happens to you.
No, but I do. Very much.
There was a heck of a fuss about it because going out on American TV, the Saint episode went on, and closely adjoining it was the Baron episode, which was the same story.
The old script and the new script were both shown that weekend on television, and we got caught out.
And it was an embarrassment for Terry, but I mean, you know, I suppose there's a limited number of stories in the world. It's like cowboy films, after all, you know. The good guy and the bad guy and the sheriff, they're all much the same, but yeah, it's just unfortunate to Terry that both shows came out at the same time on television. One old show being regurgitated and the new one with almost the identical plot by the same writer.
There was quite a fuss about that.
Well, I don't blame the writer. I blame that the formats in themselves are all derivative, imitative, and therefore predictable. So why should the poor writer try to be original when the box that he's writing for is not?
Because we were making so many series at Elstree at that time, I mean, there must have been about 4 or 5, even 6 being made at the same time, the writers were under a tremendous strain to do all the same sort of action series, but under just a different name, really. And quite often I would get a script that I'd seen before, very roughly, that had been portrayed in the Baron, and here it was in the Saint. Same sort of action, same sort of characters, probably different names, but this is exactly the same situation. It must have been absolute hell for the writers to try and think up something different under such pressure and so quickly. They had to write those scripts very, very quickly.
And there was no question as to who was going to play Simon Templar. They needed someone tall, dark, and good-looking. They stayed with Roger Moore.
Roger Moore was the perfect choice. I mean, the show was a Rolls Royce of those action-adventure shows. Episode after episode after episode really, really worked well. And I think as long as Roger Moore was willing to do it, and as long as the show was selling in such huge numbers abroad, and as long as it was delivering the goods, then they would keep on making it.
He was the one who was the series when we're talking about the Saint. Well, quite obviously, whoever played that part had to be absolutely top-notch, otherwise there would be no series. But he was it, of course, and he was ideal casting, ideal temperament, exactly the right man.
Oh, Simon, you're an angel. It's lovely. It really is. You're a darling.
Roger Moore, now Roger was an absolutely wonderful artist to work with.
There wasn't anybody on that set who was not fond of him, didn't say anything that was just not wonderful, and he made everybody feel comfortable all the time. And if there was a glitch in a line, he always took the blame. My fault. One of the most gracious men I've ever met.
He was always first man in the studio in the morning and last to go out at night.
He was always on time, he was always fun to be with. He always kept the crew happy and an absolute pleasure to work with.
He was instrumental all the way through in keeping that atmosphere of fun and lightheartedness in the crew and in the other actors.
A splendid performance, children. Jacqueline?
You, darling, were merely magnificent.
Simon, for you, anything.
Anything?
Anytime.
Anytime.
Any place.
Now you tell me.
Roger was a great practical joker. I mean, he was all the time sending people up and doing funny things in front of the leading ladies and God knows what. Could be irritating if you're trying to meet a busy schedule, but when you've got a long-running show, it's very important to keep up the morale of the crew. So, you know, you would sacrifice speed sometimes just to have a right atmosphere.
Roger, as you can imagine, was suave, urbane, sophisticated, witty, a very humorous man, and enormous fun to work with. In the mornings, he would concentrate on the work. Then we'd go and have lunch. After lunch, he never stopped telling stories, which made everybody fall about. But we still managed to get on with the job.
He was so warm and so welcoming and so helpful, always helpful and fun.
I think the reason why The Saint lasted for such a long time was obviously because of Roger, because he has such a likeable personality, off stage and on, and that came across so vividly. There was a tongue in his cheek, all the time, a twinkle in his eye.
And great fun to do, and no feeling of tension, really, on the set.
The atmosphere of a set always stems from the leading actors, and in that respect, I mean, The Saint was always a very happy set because Roger was so easygoing and so amusing.
Last night at 10, Therese, Celeste, and myself, we were practicing a rather obscure Mozart string quartet.
A quartet? With 3 people?
Jacqueline?
Yes, my angel?
Roger used to play around a hell of a lot, much to Monty's annoyance, and used to send him a bill at the end of each episode, the film that was wasted with Roger mucking around. But Roger would always relax the crew.
Darling Roger. Roger was divine. The atmosphere on set was always so relaxed, so funny. He was such a comedian, always cracking jokes, so charming.
It's very difficult to work with the same group of people, not the actors, but the same group of technicians that you don't have jokes with, and you're making a joke before a shot.
We went to Rush's one day, and there's the Saint in the car travelling at 100 miles an hour, and suddenly he disappears out of the scene, and the camera assistant is now sitting there driving the car.
And I'm running alongside. I hold up a piece of paper which says, stop. He holds up a piece of paper that says, why?
And the third bit comes on, which says, my cock's caught in the door. And that had the appropriate effect, except I remember Monty Berman saying something like to me afterwards, please send Mr. Moore an invoice for 200 feet of film stock and processing, and, wasting the company's film stock.
What's the matter? Lockjaw? Well, let's see if we'll loosen it up.
Oh, no. Oh, please don't. No. Oh, no, don't.
They hated me on the set because if there was a soda siphon, which you don't see around these days, but soda siphons, and they knew what was going to happen, that I would always get myself near a soda siphon at the end, and then psh, they couldn't. I say, no, you can't do it to me. I'm on camera.
I was going up to Elstree to have lunch with Bob, and I was doing something else there, and I walked into Robert S. Baker's office, and there was a picture of me on the desk, and I just flipped it over, and on the back it said, "I've had her," and there was the Saint emblem with the. I thought, you devil.
Lydic.
Oh, it's just not me, it's a forgery.
So Bob laughed, and I looked at it. I said, "You don't believe that, do you?" And he laughed. I don't know whether he believed it or not. So you see, that's naughty Roger.
It's always a pleasure to work with Roger.
We always got the job done in the time allocated, and I suspect within the budget allocated, And a bit of larking about never hurts, especially on a show like The Saint, which was kind of a light-hearted adventure thing.
And it would relax the crew. They all loved Roger. He would come on the stage and say, "Hello, Frankie, how are you? How's the new car? And hello, Ken, how's the kids?" I mean, he would remember everybody's name, incredible. Even now, he'd walk through the restaurant in Pinewood or wherever and come up and say, "Hi there, how are you? How's the wife? How's the kids?" He's a super guy.
However, one member of the team decided not to stay. After many years of working together, Monty Berman and Robert S. Baker decided to go their separate ways. Monty went on to pastures new with the Baron, whilst Robert stayed on to produce more of The Saint.
After we finished shooting The Saint, we started on a show called The Baron, which was also a television series. similar to the Saint, but the hero was an antiques collector who had various adventures getting various things. So Monty and I started on that.
I think it was mainly the fact that it's like a pie, you know, that if there's only one pie, then, you know, you and your partner have half each. But if there's two pies going around, then obviously you're going to go for the big job.
At that particular time, I wanted to do some more Saints. And Monty and I came to an agreement. I would pull out of the Baron totally, leave it to him, and I would do the Saints, and he would do the Baron.
Monty could go off and produce his own show with the financial benefits of being the sole producer, while Bob would carry on, if necessary, doing the Saint. So I think they split up mainly for that reason, so they could each have their own show.
With a new contract in place, Leslie Charteris had retained his role as consultant. The producers were able to create new adventures for the Saint, but Charteris retained the right to comment both on the initial story synopsis and the final script. Some of the original stories that hadn't yet been adapted, such as The Better Mousetrap and The Angel's Eye, came in for high praise from the Saint's creator.
Monsieur Templar?
Others did not. I've just read the script of Delilah, which turned out just about as I expected. Plenty of action and no fun or surprises. This may be an appropriate time to remind you of two other desirables that this script follows a pattern of lacking. One, there's no humour, witty repartee, or even just fun, which is supposed to be characteristics of Saint adventures. And two, once again he's living high and happy without any suggestion that he might ever need the wherewithal to pay a bill. Oh, maybe he has a television contract?
What writers should do when they assign a thing for films or for television, they should walk away from it and leave it to the people that make the show.
Charteris wasn't keen on the scales of justice either. Only television executives, their ancestral generation of B-picture producers and pulp magazine editors, and the infantile public they are supposedly catering to, could believe in a paranoiac who dedicates himself to murdering an entire board of directors or some 7 or 8 people because his father died of overwork and a broken heart, and his inheritance vanished. If you are reduced to considering outlines like The Scales of Justice by Robert Holmes, you have my sympathy. Today's available writers must be a miserably witless lot.
John Cruise was a great writer. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, and nor was Terry Nation, unfortunately, but they were the two writers that we relied on more than anybody else. Most of the other scripts, I must say, were almost entirely written by Harry Junkin, or great proportions of them were written by Harry Junkin, except for Cruise and Terry Nation.
Charteris agreed with the producers, commenting more than once that this guy Cruise is really the find of the operation. And for Cruise's two-parter, very high praise. The Fiction Makers fulfills all the promise of the synopsis, and the dialogue has a crisp sparkle which has all too often been lacking in other scripts. It's true that I still somewhat prefer the treatment of the ending which I suggested, but it is simply a splendid job. I hope there'll be a lot more scripts like this.
Harry Junkin was one of the most efficient story editors I've ever worked with. His work was absolutely brilliant. He did, however, have an abrasive attitude which upset some people, but his work was really perfect. Harry and I got on very, very well.
It was Junkin, more often than not, that Charteris had in his sights. I have just read the script, which is still called Framed. Somebody must have thought, because it deals with pictures, that this was a devastatingly witty title. I don't. I note that my constructive suggestions were stolidly ignored, leaving me with a dreamlike feeling that the memo might as well have been addressed to Santa Claus at the North Pole, if indeed it reached you at all. It will certainly make me think twice about wasting my time again trying to contribute anything. Seems to me that this may all have gone through while you were on holiday, and Junkin may have been in sole sway, which would have explained everything. You know my estimate of Junkin's mentality, which I have been convinced suffers from a natural addiction to corn and clichés, of a congenital inability to recognise them. Nevertheless, when they've been pointed out to him, even he should be capable of insisting that the writer he is supervising should think up some alternative.
You say Signor Allard was your close friend?
Yes, he asked me to meet him here.
For what?
He didn't say, he just said it was urgent.
And?
That's all. He wasn't here 20 seconds before somebody threw that knife.
Did he mention any names, Signore?
But although Charteris may not have been overly fond of Junkin, those who worked more closely with him couldn't have been happier with his work.
Harry Junkin's work was absolutely invaluable, and for a television series, he is the mainstay to make sure the production's going smoothly.
The portrait of Brenda was very obviously not one of Charteris's favourites, thanks, it seems, to the ubiquitous Harry Junkin. Developed in depth to an excruciating 48 minutes 55 seconds, the solution to this great mystery has all the impact of a wet sponge, and the gigantic swindle is exactly as corny and petty as I predicted it would be from the outline, which Junkin has followed with unswerving devotion. I would say that the most desperate need in your organisation is for a supervisor of script supervisors.
We had lots of very sticky memos from Leslie. He took delight in particularly aiming his arrows at Harry Junkin, our story editor. We had plenty of even worse memos than that.
Although the series was now being shot in colour, very little else had changed. The move to colour hadn't meant much more in the way of location work. The Saint still managed to travel around the world without ever leaving Elstree.
One of the big complaints I had when I was making The Saint was that Simon Templar went to all these wonderful places, but Roger Moore, the actor, didn't. Roger Moore was stuck on the backlots, or else standing in front of a blue screen on a cold soundstage in the middle of an Elstree winter. But then when I got to these exotic places, I found like they were hot, and there were lots of background noises like helicopters coming in and ladies commentating on an exhibition of a trampoline jump or a tennis match. But who am I to complain? I'm on holiday now, and this is Monte Carlo.
Yes, it was the terribly convincing blue screen.
Well, we used a lot of blue screen, of course, for car effects mainly, backgrounds for cars. But we also, if we had night shots, we used a revolving drum.
Which is about a 12-foot, 15-foot drum. Would have paints on it, either houses or trees, and put branches on it.
You put it behind a mock-up of the car and revolve it, and the effect would be that somebody is, going along, travelling fast in a car.
Well, you're in a made-up car, or vehicle, or bits of it, not all of it, and you're driving along, and whatever's happening in the car is happening here.
Well, it seemed like the car was balanced on something, and it was jogging up and down, sort of bouncing, and it gave the effect of, while they were filming, that it was actually moving along.
It's play. It's like improvising, really. Play acting.
Oh, Papa, how could you? I suppose you know the casino will ban us from now on. How will we make up the housekeeping?
Watch where you're going.
I mean, one of the problems sometimes was that on car chases and stuff like that, we'd shoot the scene against a blue backing with Roger or whoever's in the car, speeding along, turning the wheel left and right to go around corners. And when they shot the material, the travelling shots that was transposed back onto the blue screen, sometimes the car was going one way and the road was going the other. We never had any complaints, funny enough. People didn't seem to notice it, but if you're swinging the wheel right and suddenly the road's going to the left, it can be a bit confusing.
We used to do what we called forced photography for night shooting, day for night, and where they would expose the film slightly. And so when you've got nighttime, you get this rather grey effect, which was very good. And day for night, we'd never hardly ever shoot at night. If we were shooting at night, we would put a sign up. The assistant director would have a sign, please switch your headlamps on filming. And so people, not everybody, so you've got the occasional car going through without any lights on at all.
Like many ITC shows of the time, the Saint made good use of the Elstree backlot to transport Simon Templar around the world. Charteris, though, wasn't a fan. I wish we could avoid using that old mythical South American republic again, though. We have had rather a lot of them, and each time we add to the list, we are bound to become more improbable.
I really got to hate that backlot. They were nice stages, but the backlot.
But we collected quite a series of plates which could apply to anywhere in the world and use them as a background. There wasn't a vast amount of special effects used in it at all.
I used to stand out there in a silk suit, freezing to death with a rubber palm tree blowing in front of my face, and they would write on the screen, Nassau, Bahamas. And I would say, wouldn't it be wonderful to go to these places? Well, of course, you go and shoot in those places, which I eventually did with Persuaders and then with Bond. And of course you say, oh, I wish I were on the back lot. And I could go home at the end of a day's shooting.
The Saint still found himself fighting international criminals, helping damsels in distress, and just occasionally trying to stop a race of giant ants from taking over the world. Or at least Wales.
Wales is a land of mountains and scudding clouds, a land of brooding mystery steeped in the past, a land of song and sorcery. It is the home of Merlin, King Arthur's master magician, and unpronounceable names.
House on Dragon's Rock was the first away location the Saint had ever done. We were allowed to go up to Wales, to the area I found around Blaenau and Penrhyn-Daidrath, and we were allowed to go up there to shoot so many episodes of cars going up roads, coming down roads, and also to find an area where we could mat in the house at Stanmore Hall.
It was a fairly sort of horrific story, supposed to be a horrific story, which took place in North Wales.
Now, Terry, this is Shoney. We found him. Everybody back to the pub. Acknowledge.
We'll take you home now.
Acknowledge, please.
But, Owen, you're safe now. There's nothing to be afraid of.
Terry, can you hear me?
And what's wrong?
Because we hadn't got a monster which was supposed to be in the form of a giant ant in a cave, we used a lot of blue backing matte shots, and so we never ever saw the ant until it was put on while we were in post-production. It wasn't a very good effect. It got quite a hoot, actually, because this giant ant being shot at.
They won't hurt you. I won't let them. I'll help you. I promise I'll help you.
Nowadays, people would laugh at it, but in those days, we thought it was fantastic.
I collected an award for that from somewhere for worst special effect.
A case of mistaken identity, or was it? The Saint, always on the side of the underdog, makes it his business to find out.
It's not just his hide I'm after anymore. It's his blood.
This strange feeling, Simon, is the Sicilian sickness. Contagious. We call it vendetta.
The Saint visits Italy and finds there is truth in the saying, see Naples and die, in Vendetta for the Saint.
During the making of the Saint, we had two-parters. One was the fiction makers, and one was Vendetta for the Saint.
Truth is stranger than fiction, as the Saint soon discovers when he becomes entangled with a lady novelist masquerading under the pen name of Amos Klein and assumes her identity in The Fiction Makers.
The Fiction Makers was really quite fascinating because it was meant to be shot as a film. Well, they were all shot as a film. That was the whole point about The Saint. It had ostensibly nothing to do with television. You were making a movie which was going to be shown on television. And this, of course, was to be a full-length movie, but in two halves.
There was too much story, really, to go into a one-hour episode. there was quite a lot of story to be done. So we decided we'd make a two-part episode. We'll make the first part, and then we'll make the second part. But I figured that in order to take advantage of this situation, there's a number of smaller territories, smaller countries, that if we put the two parts together, we could show it as a feature film.
So you had 2 episodes for the United Kingdom and other territories, but also the 2 halves could be joined together as one movie and released elsewhere in the world.
To be a two-parter.
And obviously there's a need for cinema films, and so they made the double episodes.
So it literally was scheduled for a month, for 4-week shooting. Roy Baker directed it, and it was very, very complicated because we had all these beam rays to simulate on the set.
It was almost a pastiche of the James Bond pictures and very slightly satirical in its attitude.
But it was a great fun to do because I had to play a film star and I had to put on this Marilyn Monroe voice, this very whispery voice, and sort of act like she did, you know, sort of wiggle and pout. And
Aren't I divine?
You stole the scene, darling.
You must admit, it does move.
Oh, it moves all right. Predictably, but it moves.
So I enjoyed that, and it was fun doing it with Roger, of course.
We ran a bit over schedule on that, and the next episode that came up due to start in the 5th week, so we did 4 weeks on The Fiction Makers. In the 5th week, there was still some to shoot on it. Roy still had virtually a week's work to do on it.
We had a lot of very serious help from Roger.
He worked on one stage, do a shot, then he'd go up to the other stage and work on the other episode, then he'd come back. It was hilarious, but he was game. I mean, he was no end of a treasure, you know.
It was difficult to do it. It had quite a big cast, there were a lot of people. It wasn't simple. And there were no scenes where you could sort of have a 5 or 6 minute scene with only 2 people, which you can knock off in a couple of hours if all goes well. There was nothing like that. It was quite difficult to do.
One of the last Saint episodes to be filmed featured the terribly English Simon Templar meeting up with an obnoxious, loud-mouthed American. Although viewers didn't realise it at the time, this episode was created to see just how successful a formula this could be for a series.
One of the shows that particularly stand out was The Ex-King of Diamonds, not because it was a particularly outstanding show, but because it really wasn't The Saint.
I was about to make the feature film with Roger, and the idea was hit upon as a sort of trial run with the crew and working with Roger, that I direct an episode of The Saint.
The Saint usually works by himself, and for a long time I had in the back of my mind doing a series, a buddy show, an American and a British hero working together. So we thought it would be a good idea to try one of The Saints and see how it will work.
Wait a minute. Cops are not natural hazards.
But you see, on that particular stretch of the road, they're a built-in feature.
You knew that. Why, you low-down, sidewinding son of a...
Didn't your old pappy ever tell you that if you cannot afford the stakes, you should not bet?
Simon Templar has somebody who's going in the same direction as he, but in a different way, which was Stuart Damon, an American and an Englishman.
Bob Baker told me subsequently that he was thinking of a series to be called The Persuaders, and asked me to do this as a sort of pilot for it. So the American and the Saint solving a crime. And I remember we cast Stuart Damon.
You like a bad penny, you know. Who asked you?
I thought you were having trouble with the language.
Oh, listen, pal, I speak French as well as you do. That is the best opening pitch I've ever done in my life.
Well, if you speak French up well, what is French for? A great big fellow has come up and walked off with your girls.
It was a wonderful part. I had a lot of fun playing it, playing this Texas high roller.
We did think of Stuart. Immediately we decided to have an American or Millionaire because I've been watching Stuart work in the same studios. We were making The Saint. He was making The Champions with Monty Berman. I met Stuart and we used to talk together, and he and Roger got on. So when we wanted the American, he was the obvious choice. So he filled the bill perfectly.
It's an old formula, Spencer Tracy and Clark Gable, two leading men who have different ways of going about things, and the contrast works.
And it eventually became, of course, the Persuaders, and Tony Curtis played the part that I played. I was extremely jealous. I really wanted to do that with Roger. I loved working with Roger.
And we use this as an idea as a pilot for what was the Persuaders.
Gotta get away. Once we're heading down the track, gotta get away. Then there'll be no turning back. Gotta get away. Where the sky is blue above and the sun shines.
Oh, I see. Was that any help?
From that point on, we developed it even further, and the Persuaders was the result.
The Saint was a rating smash, even making it into the list of the most watched shows in 1967. But Charteris protested the ordinary, the clichés. Frankly, this read to me like the kind of farrago of lurid nonsense and hackneyed manoeuvres that any writer in search of a pot-boiling assignment could slapdash out in half an hour with the aid of a couple of highballs. In my opinion, this is strictly garbage. I've often complained about the weekly coincidences which launched the TV Saint on an adventure, but the opening of this one is the most preposterous yet. I have to note that this is yet another script in which the Saint gets involved by sheer wild coincidence, just happening to be on the spot when a body is washed up. Now, the Saint in the stories is always looking for trouble. Are all your writers incapable of devising a plot in which the Saint is intrigued by something he hears or reads about in the paper and deliberately sets out to investigate?
The fact is that the show ran for 6 years, so we must have been doing the thing right.
But soon the end was in sight, and both star and producers wanted to do something else.
Having made the show for 6 years continuously, you get to the point of where you really want to do something else. You've done it. You've done all you can do on that particular show. We just ran out of steam. Things been running long enough. We felt it time to pull the plug, and we did.
It seemed that Simon Templar's adventures on television were over, for now at least. But in the mid-70s, the Saint returned, in the guise of a multi-talented star of stage and screen who was clearly far superior to Roger Moore and was overall a much better choice for the part. But that's another story.
In fact, the story of Return of the Saint starts with classic 1970s TV drama Upstairs, Downstairs. For 5 episodes in 1972, featured a young and upcoming actor by the name of Ian Ogilvy.
Bob Baker saw me in Upstairs, Downstairs, which was a long time before we ever started The Saint, and apparently said to his wife, if we ever make The Saint again, that would be a good chap for it. And indeed, shortly after that, I had lunch with him, and he told me about his interest and said, would you be interested? And I said, sure.
About 10 years after we shot The Saint, I had a meeting with Lou Grade. I think it was Sir Lou Grade at the time, or Lord Grade, I can't remember. And I said, Lou, you know, I think that Return to the Saint would be a very good idea. Lou said, well, fine. I says, who's going to play the Saint? Who's going to play Roger's part? I said, well, I've seen an actor in a couple of films, and I've watched his work. He's very good looking. He's a good actor. His name is Ian Ogilvy. So he said, well, I'll tell you what. He says, why don't you shoot a test on Ian Ogilvy, and we'll do a Saint scene. He says, and we'll have a look at it.
We had a producer who
so knew what he was doing. I mean, he'd done it before with Roger for years, he'd done other series, he knew exactly how this kind of stuff worked. And, we should all have bowed down to Bob Baker because he knew he really knew his onions, that guy.
We phoned in, I got him down to the studio, I got a scene ready from one of the old Saints, I brought in an actress to play opposite him, and we did a scene, and he was perfect. I took the show to Lou. Lou says, yes, it's great, he's going to be the Saint. He took the scene that we shot over to America the next week. He was going over there for a meeting with ABC Television, showed them the scene, and got the deal on Return of the Saint, just like that. So he came back and says, right, we've got a deal, we're making 24 episodes, get the show together.
With Lord Grade backing the show, young Ian Ogilvy was quickly confirmed as the new Saint, though for just a minute it looked like he might be playing the son of the original Saint. For film and TV trade paper Variety reported in June 1976 that ITC is planning a second-generation sequel called Son of the Saint. The only hitch at the moment is that author Leslie Charteris, who created the character and who doesn't need the money, has yet to flash a green light for the project. As presently envisaged, the new format would have a grey-haired Moor in a Stetson opening and introducing his offspring, then begging off.
It was very quickly discussed and rejected simply because I was too old and Roger was too young for that. And also, I think it was borne in on people's ideas that it was a perfectly self-contained series. You could simply make Return of the Saint. People had played... Roger was not the first to play the Saint. There were many Saints before him, including George Sanders and even Vincent Price.
Common sense prevailed, and soon Bob Baker started hiring his crew.
The next thing we had to do was get a story editor to begin to collect the scripts, and Harry Junkin, who did the original Saints, wasn't available, so we decided that we would get an American story editor. So I flew across to Los Angeles and met with a few writers. One was a man named Peter Allen Fields, who initially came over and agreed to be story editor, which he did do. We started writing the scenes, but after a little while he felt he didn't want to stay in England, he wanted to go back to America. So in the middle of shooting some of the original episodes of, the first episodes of Return of the Saint, I had to bring in the producers to stand in for me. And I had to fly back to Los Angeles and interviewed a few writers. And I met a writer named Tony Spinner, but he was not prepared to be just a story editor, he wanted to be producer as well. So I moved up to executive producer. He took over the job as producer, although in point of fact, really, he was just a story editor.
Tony was an American, came out of sort of commercial television in Los Angeles, and had that kind of take on things, and was a kind of logic fanatic, and a really, really, really interesting man to work with. Relentless, absolutely relentless.
The one thing he did do was he tried to stifle as much of the violence as possible in the shows, partly because at the time America was going through a terribly puritanical television bit where violence was very much tamped down. So all our fight scenes, or nearly all our fight scenes in The Saint, involved a baddie the size of a London bus coming at me, and I'd go, dum, and he'd fall over, which I always thought was a bit silly, because I'm not a big man, and I was always rather slight in those days. But that was one of his influences, which I thought was a mistake. But then, on the other hand, he might have been right about selling to America.
But he was particularly clever at the job. He was quite brilliant at the job. And from that point onwards, we had no script problems. We went right through the series. He would rewrite any scripts that came in he thought were not up to par. And we shot 9 episodes in Italy. He moved out there with us as a producer and a story editor, and things went remarkably smoothly as far as scripts are concerned.
Other crew members hired included many who had worked on the previous series of The Saint. Malcolm Christopher was production supervisor.
Great opportunity. It was like a roadshow.
To help write for The Saint, Baker turned to one of Charteris's favourite scriptwriters and a frequent contributor to the previous TV series, John Cruise. Other writers were established scribes such as Michael Pertwee and a young scriptwriter called John Goldsmith.
I think it was through Jerry Anderson. The first script I ever sold for television was to Jerry Anderson for a show called The Protectors. Nari Dawn Porter and Robert Vaughan. Top-notch casting in those days, which is a rare animal now. It was a half-hour action-adventure of a sort of international kind. It was trying to compete with America. And I did, I think, 2 of those. And when they started the new series of The Saint, Bob was looking for writers, bumped into Jerry in the corridor. That's how it worked in those days.
One member of the crew, however, got the job through a family connection.
Simon Cowell's my wife's cousin, and he was. We had a wedding reception at his father's house in Elstree, which is a fabulous house. And there were his brother here and Simon and Nicholas were a couple of little rascals. And it came one school holidays, and Eric wanted me to give Simon a job as just for the school holidays, and I gave him a job for 8 weeks.
One of the earliest decisions regarding the show was to send The Saint out on location rather than make use of the back lot at Elstree, which had been used to very good effect in the previous series.
And we started off in the south of France, came back to England to shoot finish the shows off in England, and then we went on to Italy to shoot 9 episodes around Italy, going from Cortina in the north, the Cinque Torre, down to Florence, Porto Ercole, Montalcino, Florence at San Gimignano, then to Rome, where we shot about 4 episodes in Rome, in and around Rome, and then going on to Latina, which is south of Rome. And we were quite a small unit. We were about 14 UK people. And Bob allowed me a pretty free hand. I got 4 little vans, a little 1-tonner and 3 minibuses. And we took all our props and clothes with us. Well, 1 caravanette for Ian as his own personal caravanette. And we just moved from one show to another show. With very little preparation. I think we started off in Cortina. We had about a week's preparation in Cortina. I had been to these locations beforehand, so when we took photographs back so the writers could write about the places we had, and so then we would always be a couple of weeks ahead. But we always had to have a plan B, because if something went wrong, like it snowed or didn't snow or whatever, we could go on to plan B. But it worked very well.
I think what was lovely was doing the foreign locations. I mean, they cost a fortune, and I think the show would have been just as successful without them, but I do think it gave an added little gloss to it, which it didn't have otherwise.
We were staying in the Val d'Or in Sir John Cap Ferrat. It was a lovely hotel, very quiet, by the side of a marina of various boats, and we were all sitting in the bar. That was Ian Ogilvy, myself, my wife, and Leslie Charteris having a drink before dinner. And who should barge in but Oliver Reed? Now, Oliver Reed had worked for me on a couple of episodes of The Old Saint. So he turned around and said, "Oh, Bob, what are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, here we're making Return of the Saint." He said, "Are you really?" He was a little bit worse for wear at the time, but he was articulate. I says, and this is Ian Ogilvy, the new saint. He says, "What, him?" So I said, "Yes." So he says, and I said, "This is Leslie Charteris, the author of The Saint." So he turned around and looked. He said, "Are you really Leslie Charteris?" So Leslie says, "Yes." He says, "I've always wondered, admired your books so much." And Leslie said, "That's very, very nice of you." He says, "We're going to seal our friendship." So I looked at him, and Leslie looked at him, and Ian looked at him, and said, "Well, fine, what are you going to do?" So he went over to the bar. The barman had, at that particular point, disappeared. He produced the bar knife. He cut his wrist, slightly drawing blood, and he went across to Leslie. He says, "We're going to become blood brothers. Give me your wrist." So Leslie nearly went white, and he sat on his hands and wouldn't move. And eventually persuaded our friend to back off, and we were blood brothers without actually exchanging blood. So that was Ollie Reed. But you can never rely on. When you were with Oliver Reed, anything could happen, anytime, any place, and usually did.
To help differentiate the show as well as bring it into the 70s, the decision was taken not to have the Saint talk directly to the audience at the start of every episode, but to have a straightforward voiceover.
When I knew I was going to do Return of the Saint, I had to do things that are different to the Old Saint. The first thing was the presentation of the show. In the Old Saint, Roger would talk to camera, make an association between him and the audience straight away. But in this case, we decided not to have Ian talk directly to camera, but to talk over camera, which is much the same thing. We wanted to take the show a little bit out of true reality and give it a little fairy story background, as if the Saint relating his adventures to a certain extent. So that was the first thing we did.
The voiceovers we did at the beginning were always done individually. I literally would be taken aside at the end of a day, or maybe at lunchtime. Oh, quickly, could you just come over here and we'll do the voiceover? And I would simply just stand there and read it.
Dallas, 1963. Memphis, 1968. The crack of the assassin's gun. The panic, the confusion. It's all there stark and real on the television screen. And for a moment you feel involved, but only for a moment. Well, this time I am involved. How or why, I don't know yet. Maybe I'm just about to find out. Jim.
Did you see it?
It was a miracle Kamal survived.
He'll need more than a miracle next time.
10 years had passed since The Last Saint, and the Saint was pretty vivid in everyone's imagination, Roger Moore. So Ian had a difficult job to do to follow in Roger's shoes, same as Roger had a difficult job to do in following Sean Connery's shoes in Bonds.
You've just taken the J out of joy.
The Saint doesn't have a character. The Saint is what you make him. Like all heroes, action heroes specifically, James Bond, the Saint, and even, for instance, lots of Dickens characters, the leading men. If you read them carefully, they are almost entirely without character. All right, you could say that the Saint was debonair, and he was suave, and he had a twinkly smile, and he was nice to girls. That's not character, is it? So every actor who plays the Saint essentially plays himself. And the reason you get cast is because your character, or the sort of person you are, fits that character. It's not really an acting job, it's more a sort of personality job.
And the Saint had to have a car. Having seen how well Volvo did from the previous series, Jaguar, only too keen to correct their mistake, and offered the producers use of a Jaguar XJS.
When it came to do Return of the Saint, we thought, well, we'll phone Jaguar. We wanted a British car. Well, of course, Jaguar couldn't fall over themselves quick enough to supply us a car. And not only did they supply us a car, they supplied us a car anywhere in the world with a driver to maintain it and look after it and make sure it was mechanically perfect. So, indeed, we used a Jaguar and had no problems with it. It was fine.
And we had two Jaguars, one automatic and one manual. One had a sunroof. I've been looking at the episodes to see which one was in which. But they were basically the same sort of car, but we kept a manual one for staying in one gear if we wanted to or whatever, and the sunroof was great so the cameraman could light through the roof if necessary. They weren't the most reliable car in the world because they were early production models, but they were good-looking cars.
Guest stars included Sam Wanamaker, Stratford Johns, Britt Ekland, Linda Thorson, Mary Tam, and Jenny Hanley.
It's Robbie.
Up to you. Your father says Jane's dead.
Yes, Robbie, she is.
I remember one of the guest actors we had was Sam Wanamaker, the American actor who'd made his home in England. And Sam was so beloved by us all and so good, and we also knew he was a director, that Bob Baker asked him to come and direct a couple of episodes as well. So having been a guest actor in it, he then went on and directed a couple.
Well, Ian was a great chum of mine, and I'm sure must have probably suggested that I should play this part. And in fact, it went to another actress, a French actress, who, because I think they thought I wasn't available, because I had been filming in North Africa, and I think they thought I was still out there. Anyway, what happened was that the French actress who played the part was unintelligible. They couldn't, and at first they were going to dub her, and then they decided that the dubbing was too difficult with her mouth movements, and so they said, it's no good, we've got to reshoot the scenes. Let's see if Kate's available now, let's see if she's back. Kate was available, so I went in just to shoot her close-ups, or her scenes. And which was quite extraordinary, because all the other actors who were in, if there was more than one actor in a scene, they didn't bother with that. They kept the scene as it was, but went into close up on everybody, including me. And the big scenes with Ian, obviously they shot in 2 shots because Ian was available, and I remember shooting at London Airport or somewhere and doing all sorts of things. Anyway, the upshot of this was that I then featured in this episode. The actor Brian Marshall was also in this episode, as were various other people, but it affected Brian very much because he didn't know that the girl had been replaced. And when they showed the episode, he said, but I don't remember Kate being in this, because I knew Brian, I'd worked with Brian. We'd done a movie together in Paris. I said, but I don't, I'm in that scene, but I don't remember Kate. Oh my God, he thought he was hallucinating.
You're mad.
Final briefing at the safe house tomorrow. Assemble all personnel, 0900 hours.
Come on, Morgan.
Simon, O'Hara might be right. We are taking a great risk.
Don't worry, we have a few guardian angels on our side.
And eventually he twigged what must have happened, but he was very fazed by the whole thing. Fancy being in a scene that you don't know you're in, with somebody you don't know is in it.
And in an uncredited walkthrough in the 2-part story Collision Course was the Saint's creator himself, Leslie Charteris. Look carefully at the background of this scene.
I believe your story, madame.
Thank heaven for that.
The radiator hose was found to be cut. We have replaced it. Now, if you excuse me, Madame West, do you recognize any of these men?
Yes. That's Bonaparte, the man who moved in on my husband.
And together with her husband, the 5 of them stole a shipment of gold bullion passing between France and French Morocco. Worth about, $15 million, if I'm not mistaken.
I can't believe it.
We were filming Collision Course. In fact, actually, the title we used was The Saint and the Brave Goose. Collision Course was the original script title, but before it became a Saint project, which was a particularly good episode. It was a double episode. In fact, it was a feature-length film. And I remember I had a meeting with Leslie, and he was having his house redecorated. Audrey said to me, "Bob, do me a favour, will you?" I said, "Sure." Well, she said, "I'm going to have the house redecorated. I don't want Leslie anywhere around. So would you invite him to go on location with you and for a couple of weeks so that I can get the kitchen and everything sorted out whilst he's away?" So I said, "Sure, I'd be delighted to have Leslie." So we invited Leslie as a guest of the production, and we stayed at a hotel in Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat called the Val d'Or, I think it was. And Leslie always used to go there for his holidays, so he, in point of fact, he had he kept his clothes at the Val d'Or and would not have to take any clothes with him when he went on the holiday. So we were staying at the Val d'Or, and Leslie joined us there. And whilst he used to come on location with us just to see the shooting. And we were doing a scene where we needed some crowd in the background. So I says, Leslie, would you like to be in one of the scenes? He says, oh, yeah, could I? I says, yes, well, we're not using normal crowd here. We're just picking up people we can find to use for background stuff. So Leslie appeared in the scene in Collision Course, walking in the background whilst the two actors were talking in the foreground. So that was Leslie's debut. In point of fact, I think he wrote it in the Saint magazine that he actually appeared in one of the Saint episodes and challenged any viewer to see if they could pick him out.
Having read the script for Appointment in Florence, Charteris expressed his concern in a memo to producer Bob Baker. No complaint about this as a story, but it does add yet another to the lengthening list of spaghetti saints. Baker responded by explaining the situation. We are getting a lot of spaghetti saints, and indeed will be getting more, as the 9 episodes we are shooting in Italy are a co-production deal with Rai Television, and part of the agreement is that the films all have Italian backgrounds, or at least part Italian backgrounds, and that we should also employ Italian artists and crew. In terms of physical production, this operation is not easy, as we find problems mounting day by day. The Italians are not used to shooting at the speed of a television series, and do not seem to be very adept at improvisation and sudden changes of plans. However, it is an experience that I am not likely to forget.
So we went over and had a series of meetings with Rai, and I began to discover that the Rai didn't want to use any British technicians at all. They wanted the entire show to be taken over, produced by and run by Italians. I objected to this. We had a big stand-up fight. And I phoned up Lou and said, Lou, we can't get on with the Rai. Rai want their demands are impossible. We really can't do the show. Can't have control of the show. So Lou says, well, then let's do the show without Rai. So I'll put up the rest of the money. So we gave Rai the elbow, and we took over the show ourselves.
Charteris's agreement with the producers allowed him to see and comment on each script before they started production.
He was always extremely nice and kind to me, very, very supportive, always asking if there was anything he could do to help, by which he meant, if there's something about these scripts which you don't like, let me help. You don't have to be the bad guy, I can be the bad guy.
He was kinder. His memos were much not so vicious as his original memos on the Saint stories, because he didn't invent the stories. They were someone else's things.
With some stories, though, more work was required, and Charteris was quick to spot it. For the Murder Cartel, which was ultimately credited to John Goldsmith from a story by Maurice Fiddy and John Cruise, he commented that, from the credits, this seems to have been written by committee. For 3/4 of the way, it is immensely better than most scripts have been for some time. Then suddenly, whoever came in or dropped out, it falls apart. As for scene 84 on page 48, this is surely the most inept station break. The cliffhanger should obviously be when the Saint is cliffhanging.
Well, the rewrites, of course, had to be done with incredible urgency, and they were real sort of towel-on-the-head jobs. Murder Cartel, I think, took something like, I think it was about 10 days, and I played the most awful trick on Bob. It was desperately urgent. I mean, they commissioned a script which hadn't worked out, as they often don't. I mean, I've written scripts that don't work out, been rewritten by other writers. It's part of the game. And I knew they wanted it terribly urgently. And in those days, of course, there wasn't even a fax, let alone email. Everything had to be couriered. A chap would arrive in a sort of leathers and a helmet, and take away the physical script and get it on a plane and take it out to Rome, where they were based. And I knew this. So I wrote a spoof first page. Now, one of the briefs we'd all been given was to try and get more humour into these shows. And I think one of the problems with the original script of Murder Cartel was that the interpretation of humour had gone a bit agley, and there was some slapstick and stuff which had horrified everybody. So I wrote the spoof first page. It had one of the great openings of all time. It was St. Peter's Square. The saint and his CIA friend are cycling across St. Peter's Square on a tandem. And the camera pans up to the great balcony where the Pope delivers his Sunday message. And there's the Pope, who says, "Now there's a guy I'd like to make a saint." You then cut to a kitchen where the saint and his CIA pal are discussing the plot that actually is the plot of the episode about this murder cartel organisation. And they start quarrelling. And the CIA guy picks up a pie and slaps it into the saint's face, and then the saint picks up another pie. So it becomes literally a slapstick comedy sequence, right? And I put that as the first page. Now, Bob and Tony were sitting, Tony told me the story, they had shared a huge office overlooking the Forum in Rome. So the script arrives, right? It's copied and delivered. And they both sit down. This is really urgent, and they're shooting on Monday. They sit down. Bob starts reading this. Goes pale beneath his tan, looks up and says to Tony, "John's gone mad. He's gone completely mad." Now, Tony had twigged that it was a spoof. And he said, "No, I think it's great, Bob. I mean, what a wonderful opening. St. Peter's Square, the Pope is wonderful. And then, I think this next scene in the kitchen is really funny. Bob..." And then finally, Bob twigged it, turned over the page, and there was the real opening. I don't think he's ever quite forgiven me.
A lot of the scripts I thought were a little banal and a little cliched, and I would quietly in my room at night go over the next day's scene, and I'd just tinker with it. I would always keep the speeches the same length, and I would always keep the cue for the actor to whom I'm speaking would be the same. But within the speech, I would try and make it my own. And the next day I'd go to the actor and I'd say, "Look, this is what I've done." Or even the night before I'd say, "I'm going to play with it a bit, but this is what I do. Please feel free as well." And nobody ever commented on it, and nobody ever objected to it particularly. And I remember there was one funny occasion when a new director called Les Norman was going to come and direct some episodes, and Les had had a laryngectomy, which is, the operation to remove the whole larynx, and he did this esophageal speech, which is you do on the belch. It sounds really strange, but that's how he did it. And he'd retired. And Bob Baker, who was always very fond of Les Norman, said to him, "Come on, come out and do some saints." And Les said, "I can't." And Bob said, "Yes, you can. I'll give you a really noisy first assistant director who'll do all your shouting for you, but come and direct some, Les." So Les came out, and the crew had all worked with Les for years before. They all warned me about him. They said, "He's a terrible tyrant. He's a martinet. He's the cruelest. He's a wonderful director, but he's a toughie, and he'll be horrible." So I got this new script, and I was reading it, and I found this particular scene, which I thought was just awful. So I extensively rewrote this one. And the next morning I went in, and I met Les for the first time. And I said to him, "By the way, this scene we're going to shoot, Les, I've rewritten it." He, "What?" And I said, "I've rewritten it." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because it was horrible. It was dreadful. It was unspeakable." He said, "I wrote it." So I said, I can't take any of it back, can I? I still think it's a horrible scene, but I apologize. "Well, what do you want to say?" So I showed him my script, and he said, "That's crap." I said, "I think we're beginning to understand each other, aren't we? You've written crap, and I've written crap. So maybe there's something in between." Right? And we got on very, very well after that.
Leslie Norman was, I think, a great fan of mine. And he just liked the way I worked. I think he recognised in me that I was a worker, a hard worker, that I would always know my lines, always be on time and be ready, and I wouldn't mess around between takes. I would stay still so that I was ready for the next take. And he was a lovely man. He understood the business of filmmaking very well indeed. He also appreciated actors, and he was a joy to work for.
I don't want to do lots of Les Norman stories. He had two girls that all they had to do was ride in the park. And they were like extras. But he had needed a couple of riders, these pretty girls, and they came with all their gear. And I heard him say, "Right, you can ride." And they went, "Yes." I said, "Right, can you post?" And they went, "Sorry, what?" He said, "Can you post?" And they went, "I said, I don't know what post is." "Right, you can't bloody write, fuck off." I went down, I said, "Excuse me, Les, wait. I said, "Les, I've written since I was 8 years old. I don't know what posting is." He was, "When you do that to the trot." I said, "Oh, you mean rise to the trot? Ladies, can you rise to the trot?" They went, "Yes, of course." I said, "Come on." And he hired them.
But with the poppy chain, Charteris was back protesting the lack of originality. "Too bad this doesn't have a more original or offbeat theme, but it's handled with all the typical crew's competence." And The Village That Sold Its Soul also seemed somewhat formulaic. Most of the developments in this exercise in Italian Gothic are fairly predictable once the stage has been set. The adventure for the saint starts with the usual fantastic fluke, which has just become part of the format.
Well, when I was first approached, they explained that they were going to shoot a lot in Italy, so they wanted Italian stories. So I thought up this idea for a story set in a kind of primitive village in Italy. And they loved it, and I wrote the first draft, and it was very much the story I'd pitched them, and they'd accepted, and it didn't work. We couldn't work out why. It just wasn't working, and we spent at least 2 days battling away with this story, which they really liked, and yet they knew, Bob and Tony Spinner I'm talking about here, and then Tony, and he was the first one who ever told me this, and it's a great principle for a writer, try turning it upside down. So we tried turning it upside down, and in my original draft, and I'll try and get this right, the saint arrives in this village, okay, and he's seen something odd. A woman's been killed, and because he's a saint, he decides to investigate. And in the original version, I had the village trying to confine the saint to the village. And when we turned it upside down, and we had the village trying to get rid of the saint, there's nowhere to stay, frighten him off with a cart that rolls down the thing. And the saint says, "You know, the more they try and get rid of me, the more I'm inclined to stay." It suddenly was saint-like, and the whole thing worked. And I could rewrite it in a day and a half or something. I rewrote the whole thing. Basic story exactly the same, just that core motivation at the beginning different, and it worked.
The episode I like the most is one called Duel in Venice. First of all, it was shot in Venice, which is probably the most photogenic city in the world. Secondly, I think it had a rather good script and a good storyline. It was very exciting. Thirdly, I actually got wet in it, so I didn't have to run around with my hair perfectly permed and done all the time. I actually managed to look a bit scruffy in parts of that, which I liked. And thirdly, we had a wonderful leading lady, this French-Italian actress, whose name escapes me, but she was wonderful in it. She was funny. She played the little taxi driver, the little vaporetto driver of the boat, and she was great. And I just think it's easily the best episode of that show. There was one episode where I got a script about 2 or 3 weeks early, and I thought it was just a disaster. It was all about vampires, which I didn't think the Saint was anything to do with vampires. We didn't do supernatural stuff in the Saint.
Charteris had seen the initial script for the vampire episode, entitled Prince of Darkness, and credited to Stephen Candle. He wasn't keen. "I would frankly hate to have to guess whether the Saint audience would accept the supernatural basis of this obvious attempt to leap on the bandwagon of so many recently successful films with this theme. On a point of mundane realism, I suggest that whenever it is possible, and the meaning should be obvious to most viewers, the dialogue on page 44 and thereafter should be conducted in Italian, since Italians do not talk amongst themselves in English with Italian accents. It's all good goulash for those who like the dish, But I still wish more of our scripts could be innovative instead of so blatantly imitative.
I was a little dubious about the whole thing anyway, but nevertheless he went ahead and rewrote the script, and it was a good script, there's no question about it, but it wasn't The Saint. It was the wrong sort of story for The Saint, it was the wrong image for The Saint. And it was basically a horror story, as you would expect for the Prince of Darkness.
And I didn't know what to do about it, and Leslie Charteris had always been my ally. Leslie Charteris, the original author of The Saint. And he'd always been an ally of mine and always, wanted to help and things. And he always had script approval. So I called him and I said, have you seen this script? And he said, I was wondering when you were going to call. Why didn't you call about any of the others? And I said, well, I didn't think they were so bad. He went, oh, come on, they were all terrible. Anyway, this one, he said, no, this one does not get passed. I will not let this go through. And he said, and I'll keep you out of it completely. But you're absolutely right, this will not go through. And it was never shot in this episode.
The show debuted on Sunday, September the 10th, 1978, in a prime-time evening slot on the ITV network. But the critics weren't kind, with the Times calling it unintentionally comical. However, St. Ian Ogilvy went on to win the TV Times Award for the most compulsive character, so they were obviously doing something right.
Well, the press reaction in terms of publicity was fine. The critics were a nightmare, of course, but they did make me laugh. I mean, they were criticizing this show as though it was I, Claudius, in a sense. I mean, The Saint is designed for people who've had a long, hard day in the factory and come home, they sit down with a beer or a gin and tonic, and they want to see a pretty girl, a fast car, and a guy hitting people. That's what they want. This is not Hamlet we were making. So the critics on the whole were reasonably kind to me, but not terribly kind to the show. And I think, to be honest, Bob Baker and all of us sort of expected that. It was just an adventure show. I mean, I used to call it moving wallpaper, and I think it's a bit more than that. But at the same time, let's not oversell it. It wasn't anything more than a fun adventure action show. And nobody was going to say it was Hamlet or that the scripts were wonderful. They weren't. It was just a rollicking show, that's all.
I personally think that Ian Ogilvy would have, who's a very good actor, very good looking boy, would have done more series had he not chosen to play the part like Cary Grant, which was quite a deliberate artistic choice. Why he did that, I do not know. They tried to dissuade him from doing it, but he would do it. If he'd just been his own normal self, charming self, and he's a very good actor, I think that series would have gone on and on and on, but he chose to do it like that. I think the Americans didn't like it like that, and so the series was dropped. So there you go.
It met the same fate as the original Saint in America. When we took the original Saint to America, it was rejected by all the networks. When we took this show to America, the networks already bought it, ABC. They put it into bad time slot, as they did with most British shows, and it didn't do any particular ratings.
You didn't have to ask too many questions about why. I mean, who does he work for? How does he get his money? Oh, who cares? Go on, drive the car.
Ian had taken over a role that the public had become so familiar with Roger. So it was always going to be difficult for him to get the same reaction as Roger got. And by the same token, Roger's first Bond film was initially received fairly coolly because they had Sean Connery so vividly in mind of James Bond, as the James Bond, that it took Roger 2 or 3 shows to really get into the part. Now, at this particular time, we could do with another series of Return of the Saint, which would, I think, established Ian and would have gotten rid of the hangover of Roger's image.
Toward the end of the show's run, it became obvious that there would be no more adventures for the 1970s Saint. The show was expensive, and Lord Grade had other plans. He wanted to focus on film and, in particular, raise the Titanic.
General, it's over. The war's finished. You've won.
Lou Grade had, was, by virtue of his age, was forced to retire from ITC and no longer become involved in television series. So with Lou gone, there was no one there that was willing to continue with the Saint. In fact, the whole ITC system more or less packed up.
It came as a shock to everybody that we weren't going to go anymore because it would have been a huge hit. We'd sold in 73 countries all over the world. And the next time round, we weren't going to go abroad. We were going to stay in Ealing or Southall because we didn't need to go abroad. We'd got our audience. We'd established that we were glamorous and cars. And
Lou devoted what time he had with the company to producing feature films, and one or two were successful, but some were not. Raise the Titanic, as Lewis says, it had been cheaper to raise the Atlantic Ocean than to raise the Titanic, which was basically a flop.
There didn't seem to be any financial reason to cancel it, and that's the main reason why these things get stopped.
When Louis retired from television retired in that particular vein of thing. The entertainment action adventure series was no longer made, and the studios made all sorts of things, but no action adventure.
I'm sorry, Moreno. I'd love to have stayed, but... Now shut that for me, would you?
As far as quality of a show is concerned, it's much superior to the original Saint series. It really is. I must say, I'm quite proud of the quality of the show. It's really very good.
I don't know what it is about the show. I think it was cheerful. I think it was quite fun. I think it looked lovely. I think we had pretty girls. I think we had nice cars. We had effective bad guys. I just think it was a good show for its time, and people remember it.
So that was that. The Saint had returned. For a short while, anyway. The show was rerun across the ITV network just over a year later, and has been repeated periodically ever since. It sold around the world, taking the Saint's adventures from the 70s into the 80s, where, by the middle of the decade, Bob Baker thought the TV schedules were in need of a modern-day Robin Hood, so teamed up with producer D.L. Tafner, and that, as they say, is another story.